Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 908 of the Juicebox Podcast. On today's show, we have Jon Fawcett. Now, Jon is the father of a child with type 1 diabetes, a teen, in fact. He is the creator of Sugar Pixel. He's helped with Loop, and he's here today to talk about how his daughter went from Loop to Omnipod 5. We're also going to talk about Afrezza. I mean, this is a management-heavy episode. Like, if you're interested in taking care of diabetes, if you're especially interested in algorithms like Loop and Omnipod 5, or just hearing two people talk about diabetes like a couple of dorks, this one's for you. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. If you're a U.S. resident who has type 1 diabetes or is the caregiver of someone with type 1, please consider going to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and completing the survey. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. You can help to move type 1 research forward in just a few minutes by completing that survey. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Omnipod, makers of the Omnipod DASH and the Omnipod 5. Learn more and get started today at omnipod.com/juicebox. The podcast is sponsored today by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service and is 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. BetterHelp.com/juicebox. To get started, you just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. And when you use my link, you'll save 10% on your first month of therapy. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. Talk to them however you feel comfortable. Text, chat, phone, or video call. If your therapist isn't the right fit, for any reason at all, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. BetterHelp.com/juicebox. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/juicebox. Save 10% on your first month of therapy.
Hey, I'm Jon Fawcett. I am the creator of Sugar Pixel, custom type 1, and also a lot of the Loop patches for DIY Loop. My daughter, Lily, is 17, and she's the type 1 in our family. So I've been thrown into this, just like all the other parents, having to learn and figure out settings, how insulin works and all of that. And that's transitioned me into doing this basically full time, to spend all day learning new things, figuring out new things. She used DIY Loop for 3.5 years, and she's been on Omnipod 5 for 5 months now. So still learning, and every day is a new learning, but hopefully we can, discuss a lot of those things to help other people out there.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a good plan. Jon, I'm trying to think of the first time I had some sort of contact with you. I think it was, if you stop me if I'm mistaken, but I think that something along the lines of your Sugar Pixel was being shared so much on my Facebook group that you thought that I must think you were spamming the Facebook group.
Yeah, I've had to apologize to most of the Facebook group admins. I can't stop people from sharing it when they get excited about it. I mean, you know how that goes. People share Juicebox podcast links all over the Facebook groups as well. It's a similar thing to that. But that's how we first got introduced, through Kenny Fox.
Yeah. Well, you didn't have to apologize to me. I have a very simple rule about, and the rule I think just exists in my head. If people are really excited about something, or they find it helpful or whatever reason, like, it doesn't matter to me if it's another Facebook group, if it's a book, it could be a different podcast, it can be a way of eating that my daughter doesn't have, it could be your Sugar Pixel. I don't care. The only time you get in the way of that is I don't know if you know this, John. Some people are, they have nefarious instincts, and they'll like have like an affiliate link where they make money every time somebody clicks on it. Or my favorite one is, look at this great t-shirt that my sister made for my son. And it says something about diabetes on it. Isn't it great? And someone else comes in and goes, oh my God, it's so great. And then somebody else is like, I wish I had a shirt like that. Where'd you get it? And then they put, I don't know. I found it here. Here's the link. Well, you dig around a little bit, and what you learn is the person who put up the picture of the shirt is selling the shirts. The first person that came into the post to say, oh my God, it's so great, they are the same person. and then they start this fake conversation until it draws real people in, and then they sell their t-shirts that way. Or what have you. That I'm not okay with. Everything else I couldn't possibly care less. So, you did.
Well, in the last few days is like playing whack-a-mole on some of the Facebook groups, where it had to have only been a few people started joining the groups. They were fake profiles, join the group, immediately post not only the G6 for sale, but the G7 for sale. Like they have all this extra stock of Dexcom G7 that just came out. And it was every 5 minutes, a new post would pop up. I couldn't imagine being the admin trying to deal with some of these scammers that do that.
Yeah, it goes on forever. Anyway, my point is you did not have to apologize. And I would be, John, what kind of a horrible hypocrite would I be if I stopped people from sharing things in my Facebook group? Because, I don't want to brag, but the podcast is shared about every 18 seconds somewhere. So it is. And I get the other side of that, by the way, because you have a thing and you're trying to spread it. Like my thing just happens to be free to the people who listen. But even if I was selling a t-shirt, I'm sure I'd need that money to pay my bills or, sell my mat.
And
you know what I mean?
This transition pretty quickly to my full-time job. I don't know how long it took you to have Juicebox sort of become what you do every day, all day. Mm-hmm. But once it hits that point, there is this sort of competing mentality of, well, I need to generate sales to keep my electric on, but I don't want to come across like a spammer posting links all over the place. So I kind of take the approach of I just try and stay on all the groups to help people also, and not just take, but try and help as many people as I can through questions that are posted and things like that.
I stay out of other people's groups because I think generally speaking, they don't want me there because they just see me as like mining people. But in my own group, I'm there a lot. That fire to get another click or another like or another sale, I liken it to the time I spent after the first time I had sex trying to get to the second time I had sex. It's you're like, oh my God.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah. Could this happen again? I have to work 24/7 at it. But seriously, people get this, it's just a fire. You know what I mean? Like they sold their t-shirt and they made $9 and they're like, oh my God, what if I sold 100 of them? I know exactly how their brains work. Like I could keep this going. You know what I mean? So,
and one of the things for me though is the entire mentality of it is I created it because it's like Lily's at the time 16. She never wakes up to her alerts. So here mom and dad are waking up to any alert that goes off overnight because she doesn't hear her phone. And with my background in hardware and software and electronics, I was like, I can create something that can solve this. So I created it really to help not only us, but other people. So it wasn't, I never set out to be, hey, I need to make a profit and, grow this gigantic company from doing this. I'm selling a lot, but I'm still doing it because I just want to help people. Yeah. And I think that's also why people are posting it so much, is they realize how much of a need there was for something that pretty much going to guarantee you're going to wake up in the middle of the night with how annoying the alerts are.
Mm-hmm. John, that's the same thing that I find is that you don't start a podcast thinking it's going to become very popular. You just don't like, and if by the way, if you've just done that, you're silly because it doesn't work out most of the time. You're doing it because you think you'll reach a few people and that will help them. And then you notice it helped them. And you think, oh, that's great. That was what I wanted to have happen. You just, I mean, I don't know. I take your point, I guess. So you make sugar pick. Well, that's not what I want to ask you. What is your background? Like, what'd you do in college? What would you do for a living, kind of stuff?
I actually dropped out of college after my sophomore year. I was working in doing engineering consulting and got so busy and so overloaded with actual work that I was like, I need to cancel all my classes because I can make a lot more money doing that. Never figured that I wouldn't ever go back, but I never went back.
Okay.
So I kept down that route, and that's, to give away my age, that was 28 years ago or something like that.
I was going to say, in the 40s, John, everybody didn't need college.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So at some point, it's like, well, at this point in my life, it's not worth it to go back. But 13 years ago, I launched a company on Kickstarter making iPhone accessories.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with just a stupid, simple idea to wrap an iPhone cable in metal that was flexible. And threw it on Kickstarter. I was like, I think this is a cool idea. I'd been designing products for other people. But then they always took them and did the marketing side and the sales side.
Yeah.
In engineering consulting. Kickstarter gave us the chance to, hey, we can now do it direct, take this idea and see if people like it. Fast forward then, so that was 13 years ago. Over the last 13 years, that company was named number 172 on the Inc. 500 fastest growing companies in the world. We had sales in like 60 countries at one point, where we were in retail stores all over the world. And then right in the middle of that, we were actually in the middle of a lawsuit against, I'll just say, the world's largest retailer. I won't name names there.
Okay.
For selling counterfeits. So this little company started here in Akron, Ohio, suing the largest retailer in the world. Right in the middle of that lawsuit, which took like 3 years to resolve, was when Lily got diagnosed.
Oh my!
And yeah, so I'm dealing with depositions, and just, it was absolutely insane dealing with this lawsuit from this, when you get hit with, a life-changing diagnosis.
Yeah.
And I sort of came out of that, and I had, combined with those two things, sort of lost all passion for that business. Just the corporate America sort of greed type of how everything runs.
Mm-hmm.
And I slowly started doing, I had all kinds of 3D printers, all of the computer CAD software, like all the tools needed to make our own stuff at this point. So I started making custom 3D printed cases for Riley Link, and then later for Orange Link, for all the DIY loopers. Little sort of gadgets and knickknacks that made life with Type 1 easier, whether it be, simple clips to hold insulin pens on the side of the fridge out of the way, or things to better protect Riley Link. And that just kept growing and growing. And it kept growing then to the point where I was like, well, I could probably take on this sugar pixel concept that had been bubbling in my head for 3 years at the time. And all of a sudden, life flipped. You go from running this hugely successful electronics company to now complete shift where you're dealing with medical regulations and FDA requirements and all of that type of stuff in this world.
Right.
But the nuts and bolts of it is the products are all pretty much, they're just electronics, whether they're iPhone power banks or blood sugar monitors. They're just electronics.
Right. Tell me a little bit about your daughter. How old was she when she was diagnosed? I know you said the time frame, but how old was she there?
Yeah, she's 17, and I'm not good at math. She's 17 now. She was diagnosed, but she was just after her 12th birthday.
Okay.
So she's been diagnosed now for 5 years. And while I'm talking, I'm actually double checking that my math was correct. But
how is it possible you're not good with math, Jon?
Yeah, I don't, because, my teachers in elementary school and high school said, well, you got to learn this math because you won't ever have a calculator in your pocket at all times. And then now I have a computer with the entirety of the world's knowledge in my pocket at all times.
They were wrong about that. I bet on that
Yep.
too back then, Jon. I was like, I'm sure I could get a calculator if I needed one.
Yeah, so she was diagnosed in 2018, January of 2018, just after her 12th birthday.
Okay. About 5 years ago.
About 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So she was MDI for the first year-ish, and that it's sort of amazing looking at people now that come out of the hospital with Dexcoms. She was MDI with just a meter coming out of the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 6 months, I think, before the endo wanted her to have a Dexcom. The endos always were like, you need to learn how to do this without the technology. I'm kind of torn on whether that's
true or not.
The best approach or not.
Yeah.
The one reason I think, or the one thing that I think helps going through that is really learning more than just I need to divide this number by this number and that's how much I dose. It's learning the why. And I think MDI can help with that. And especially, so we did quite a bit, basically sugar surfing through that. She used an iPort for probably 6 months before she got her first pump. And the iPort let us essentially sugar surf without her complaining about it, because it's one shot every 3 days when you throw in the port.
Yeah.
But what you learn by going through that process that I think might be missing now from some people when they come straight out of the hospital with a Dexcom and a pump even, is sort of how insulin actually works. DIA is DIA, duration of insulin action. It's 5 to 6 hours, period. A lot of people see this setting on a pump and they're like, oh, I'm going to set it down to 2 hours because that works better. That's just tricking the bolus calculator to be able to dose more sooner, when in actuality, the insulin's still in their system and working. It's just their carb ratio isn't aggressive enough, or their correction factor isn't aggressive enough. So those are the types of things I think we learned by being forced to be on MDI for a little bit longer than I think some people are now. And then Loop further enforced a lot of those underlying concepts, sort of all the underlying math about how insulin works, how carbs work, and all of that.
Yeah. Can I make an assertion? I've spoken to a lot of people, and what I can tell you is that the way people answer questions is based on what they think and their experiences. So when you say to someone, you really should use MDI for 6 months or a year before you get a pump, that's how you'll learn. The rest of that sentence is, that's how some people will learn. And some people won't learn that way. There are other people who a year from now, their A1Cs will be 11 and their blood sugars are ping-ponging all over the place and they've given up already. And had you put a CGM and an algorithm on that person, they probably wouldn't know how it worked, but they'd be healthier. And I just think it's such a funny thing, because this is an argument that, is as old as time in diabetes, right? And it doesn't, you can't answer it for sure for anybody. And, and what are you going to say to someone? Are you inquisitive? Are you good with math? Does your brain like to figure out puzzles? Oh, well then you'll probably do great on MDI. Do you bump into walls? Do you not know which way is up? Do you frequently forget it's Thursday? We better get you on an algorithm. No one talks to you that way. And by the way, just because you don't understand diabetes doesn't mean you bump into walls. I'm being bombastic, but I mean, it's ridiculous to think that everyone's going to have the same experience. And
for us, it was our step-by-step through this ended up being the best way for me to learn.
Of course.
For my daughter to learn. Yeah, for other people, I completely agree. It might not be the best. Yeah. But underneath all that is still the learning about sort of the not just how to manage, but why, and the details about not just here's my carb ratio and it is what it is, but why would I need to consider changing that? Why would it be off? The first time we got a scale, my mind was blown. And just one little detail of, oh my gosh, the printed serving size, for instance, 1 cup of Cheerios is like 30% off from weighing the same Cheerios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so those types of things, those span whether your MDI algorithm pump or traditional pump, is those underlying details. So it's how someone's going to best learn those types of details in it.
Oh, 1,000,000%. And Jon, you know what I know, and you came to it a completely different way than I did because our brains are different. This whole thing is timing and amount. It's using the right amount of insulin at the right time. The right amount is your basal, your insulin to carb ratio, your, other, whatever else, insulin sensitivity. Like, it's those 3 things. And it's knowing when to put it in and how to time it, and understanding when the insulin starts to work, when it hits more aggressively, how long it lasts. If you know that, then you're on your way. Then you start learning about the different impacts of different carbs and how, 10 grams of this and 10 grams of that sometimes don't need the same amount of insulin, and how fat slows down your digestion. Like, you can keep growing your understanding, but at the core of it, it's how insulin works. It's everything, really. It's how the algorithm decides everything. The algorithm doesn't know from fat, and that's why it struggles with it. And you know what I mean? But it does everything else pretty damn well. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Actually. Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer there's also no empirical settings that can span across different systems. And that plays into this, because you go from MDI to where you're taking long acting to a pump where your basal is short acting, or then a traditional pump to an algorithm pump, even from Loop to Omnipod 5 or to Control IQ, your settings aren't going to transfer. So it's becoming less about here's your carb ratio and here's your basal rate, and more about how can I make whatever numbers I can adjust achieve the best results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I want to talk all about this with you, actually, because you sent me, and you had been, I guess, kind of booked on the show, or we were trying to get you booked. And I don't even know why you were coming on originally, other than I was like, you should come on the podcast. And then all of a sudden I get this, what I would consider from you and we don't know each other super well, Jon. We've spoken once before this. You explained Sugar Pixel to me. I got it. I thought it was really cool. I couldn't figure out how to set it up. And I haven't looked at it since then, but that's not, but I also got waylaid by the fact that my daughter's dorm room, their Wi-Fi, like, you can't get anything on Wi-Fi that isn't like an iPhone. You know what I mean? So I was like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to use it anyway. Not the point. Point is that at some point you sent me what seemed to me to be an excited email. And seriously, which is, if you really look back, if you could find 20-year-old you and be like, hey, one day, man, you're going to send an email to another man. It's going to be very excited. And you're going to say something like, hey guys, just jumping in to remind you that one of our sponsors, BetterHelp, is offering 10% off your first month of therapy when you use my link, betterhelp.com/juicebox. That's betterhelp.com/juicebox. While we're taking a break here, and I put the ads up front in this one because the conversation picks up and just really starts rolling, and I wanted to kind of break it up with the ad before the flow. Anyway, Omnipod. Now, Omnipod makes the Dash. The Dash is a tubeless insulin pump that you will just love. Omnipod also has the Omnipod 5, Now, Omnipod 5 is an algorithm that works alongside of your Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. Maybe you're interested in the Dash, maybe you're interested in the 5, maybe you haven't decided yet. Either way, all the ways, omnipod.com/juicebox will help you to move forward. If you already know what you want, head over there now and get started. If you're still deciding, head over there now and pick around a little bit. Do the reading. You know what I'm saying? 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 I'm not saying anything. It's late at night. I'm woozy. You know what I'm saying? You head over there, you figure out what you're looking for, Dash or 5. And if you're not sure, you can contact Omnipod right through my link, omnipod.com/juicebox. My daughter has been wearing an Omnipod every day, every day since she was 4 years old. Arden will be 19 this weekend, and I don't think you could make a better decision than to check out the Omnipod, whether it's the 5 or the Dash. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Both the Dash and the 5 are going to offer you the freedom of showering without disconnecting, jumping into a pool, running out and playing sports, going to do your machinations, whatever you do there during the day, go to the grocery store, no tubing to get caught on like doorknobs and handles in the cabinets and stuff like that. It doesn't matter which you pick, you're going to get all that. Then it's up to you to decide. Do I want to make some of the decisions? I want the Dash. Do I want the algorithm to make the decisions? I'm going to get the Omnipod 5. You decide. John's daughter's using the Omnipod 5. They love it. You might too. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Links in the show notes. Links at juiceboxpodcast.com to Omnipod, BetterHelp, and all the sponsors. When you click on these links, you are helping to support the podcast, and I very much appreciate it. Now I'm going to get you back to John so we can really start to geek out about all this stuff. My daughter switched from Loop to Omnipod 5, and it's amazing, and people need to know how to use it.
Yeah, I was a little giddy.
Yeah, you certainly were, actually. And I don't know you well enough to make that assertion, but that's how giddy you were in the note, as I figured you were. So what version of Loop was your daughter using before she moved to Omnipod 5?
Well, you could consider it Loop 3 now.
Okay.
She was running the dev version since last February. So it was about 9 months that she had been running that. But for the last 2.5 years, I've been customizing Loop. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people using Loop have seen the Loop patches. Those are the ones that I've written. So they were just my ways of trying to figure out and force the algorithm to fix things that I didn't think worked optimally.
Okay.
So for instance, I wrote one where if blood sugar was under a certain value, Loop would automatically switch to the temp basal strategy. If it was over that value, it would switch to the more aggressive automatic bolus. Mm-hmm. A lot of people with Loop have experienced rebound lows where you have a low, you take some carbs, and Loop sees this quick rise from the carbs and thinks you're going to hit 400 when in actuality you're going to hit 105. So that helped prevent those rebound lows. And I just kept adding more and more. Like I made one near the end of our time using Loop that I called basal lock. If your blood sugar was over a certain amount, we used 200. Loop would not cut basal. So Loop has this habit of sticky highs where you get to a high and something wasn't correct with your carb count or whatever, and you kind of plateau and you're just riding at 200 for hours on end until you add in quote unquote fake carbs. So that's what we were using with Loop, was sort of the new Loop 3. At the time it was called Dev, but with my customized patches running alongside it.
Yeah. That's what Arden's using right now, by the way.
Okay, so is she using Dash then now?
Yeah, she's using Dash, Loop Dev, and those two patches that you referred to.
Great.
Yeah.
So how did she? So I know she was on Omnipod 5 for a while, also, right?
Yeah. So what happened to Arden with Omnipod 5 is kind of simple. Is that it added a device, and she was kind of like out from the beginning. She's like, I don't want to carry another thing. that was the thing that really got her, was the PDM. Like, I think if Omnipod 5 would have come out with like an iPhone control right away, then she would have been like, fine, this is fine. I wish people understood. Arden doesn't care. She, like I hear other people come on and say, oh, my kid thought this, or my son wanted that, but Arden doesn't care. Like, she just wants it to work. And I'll tell you what, she's an interesting use case for what I believe is one of the like more valuable things about Loop, is that you can kind of see where insulin's going in and where it's coming out. And I learned a lot more about insulin looking at Night Scout. I mean, that really fast forwarded my understanding even beyond where it was of insulin. Just seeing it take insulin away and give it back and those things, it taught me a lot about how it works. Arden doesn't even pay attention to that. She's just, she's good at bolusing for her food. And she can make adjustments. She knows when something's sticky, she'll use overrides. If she thinks she's going to get low, she'll override in the other direction. She doesn't do it very frequently. I'll tell you what, she's been sick this weekend, and not really sick. She pulled a muscle in her neck and her shoulder, and it was so bad she ended up at urgent care while she was at college on Friday morning. And they gave her muscle relaxers. And if you guys have ever heard me say, like, I don't drink, or I've never been high, like stuff like that, my daughter doesn't do any of that either. And so the muscle relaxers hit her hard, as she is what would be, I think, colloquially called a lightweight. And so she was asleep for swaths of time, like 12 hours at a time, where her blood sugar is just super stable. I mean, she slept yesterday till 3 p.m. and with no intervention whatsoever. And her blood sugar didn't go over like 105 the whole time.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And that's actually, those times to me are where Loop has the most advantages over Omnipod 5 from what we've seen. Is if you're steady, it's going to keep you really steady, especially if you're, most people are trying to be under 110. With Loop, is it can keep you in that nice steady range at those times.
Also, if you go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say for Lily, she didn't like the extra device with the controller, and she's not about to switch from iPhone, but it took a purse to bribe her into giving it a shot. So we found a purse that would fit her car keys, her driver's license, everything, plus the controller perfectly. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's made it so she doesn't mind so much carrying the extra device, but she does like that her iPhone is not dead at 3:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
She always had it connected to a battery charger when she was using Loop, just because she's on, Snapchat and whatnot all day long anyways.
Oh, yeah. I would say, well, anyway, so the other thing that was going on with Arden at the time that we tried Omnipod 5 and we used it for a long time, actually, but is that she was having hormonal problems that we hadn't figured out yet. And so we were in this weird thing where we tried to go from Loop to Omnipod 5. Arden's insulin needs were wonky. And as odd as this sounds, as I am the person who hosted the 3, Omnipod 5, the pro tip series, overview, settings and connectivity, which I made along with Omnipod. I hadn't made those yet when she started. So, sometimes when you hear me say, like, the podcast helps me more than it helps you, sometimes I was at a loss still when we started Omnipod 5. So I had initially the problems that a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but some people seem to have, which is I don't think I got the settings for Omnipod 5 right when I set it up. And so between that and the hormonal stuff, and we just like fought with it for a while. And then we finally got it like right. And it was working the way we wanted it to. And I was like, see, this works great. And she's like, it does. And I was like, okay. And we used it for a while, and like, she had no trouble with it at all. And then one day she's just like, I don't want to, like, I'm going to college now and I don't want to carry this thing around anymore. She's like, can I just go back on loop so I don't have to carry anything? And I was like, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Arden ends up on Omnipod 5 at some point.
Yeah, and when the iPhone app is available, I think that's going to change a lot of people's opinions on wanting to switch. 'Cause I see that every day. You see somebody posting that they don't want an extra device, or when is the iPhone version coming out?
Yeah, and I'll say this from the other side: if you're starting now, that's not a reason not to do it, because you won't know any different. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but like, your kid won't care about carrying the controller. My daughter just had 10 years of, not carrying it. And then suddenly we were asking her to do something else. And she's like, she was more of the mind of like, I don't understand why we're switching. Like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I know. But I gave her the other reasons, which were, do you want to learn how to build a loop app in case something goes wrong? And she's like, no. And I was like, well, and then here we are. It's,
yeah.
But I'm really super interested, and I want to spend the rest of the time talking to you about how you went from, because you didn't just go from Loop to Omnipod 5. You went from a version of Loop that you basically tailored for Lily with your own patches. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and there was a lot of learning going into Omnipod 5. So don't let me, mislead you in that.
Yeah, no, I understand.
But at this point, I feel like we know the system inside and out and how it's going to behave and why it doesn't behave at times. The biggest thing that I did was I looked at TDI, total daily insulin, from Night Scout reports, and compared to that divided by 48, which is essentially what Omnipod uses for its adaptive basal. So the 48 comes from 24 hours in a day, but then it uses half of your total daily insulin for basal. So divide by 48, and that's your hourly basal rate that the system uses. And I compared that number to what her basal rate was in Loop, and it was within maybe 5%, 10%. I actually went with the slightly stronger setting than what the TDI would have been based on for the basal rate. And it also, Omnipod 5 doesn't care day or night. All it cares is basically what's your TDI and what's your IOB. It doesn't care about carbs or anything like that. So if you have 5 different basal rates, those, if you're coming from a manual system or even Loop, those have just been built up over time, usually to solve other issues, not just basal necessarily.
Right.
And so we put one basal rate in 24/7 because it doesn't matter. And I'd actually, that's my suggestion to people I talk to, is if you've got a ton of different basal rates, it's really difficult for a person to calculate what their actual total basal is for the day when your basal rates are fluctuating throughout the day. So IOB from basal alone, if you have a fixed basal rate, is times 2.1. So if you have a 1 unit basal 24/7, you always have 2.1 units of insulin on board from basal. So that's not to be confused with IOB that Loop might show you, or that the Omnipod 5 controller might show you. But that's just to say that's insulin that's in your system at all times. And using a single basal rate, I think, helped us sort of grasp that of here's how much she uses for the whole day. Split that across, 24 hours, and here's a fixed basal rate every single day. So the basal was the first thing is in starting. And I think you see most people that I see posting, they're frustrated because it's too high. Their blood sugar is too high and it's not correcting enough. And it's a sort of a myth that Omnipod 5 has learning. it has history, would be a better way to phrase it.
Yeah.
And it only has a history of 3 to 4 pods.
Right.
And it's taking a TDI average, and it's a weighted average. So the most recent day's TDI is the highest portion of the average. And that's all it uses. And it updates that during pod changes. So if you're running super high, and you're frustrated by it, it's because your TDI is too low and it's not covering your basal needs enough. And so the options are either just slowly keep correcting little by little, and every day you might be adding an extra half a unit or whatever to TDI, or do a restart and restart with more appropriate settings so that you are getting there quicker.
Mm-hmm. Hey, when you said add something to total daily insulin, you mean just by making extra boluses to try to bring down a high number?
Well, yeah. So the people that say like after 3 months, it finally started learning me, in most of those people, at least the ones that I've been able to see their actual like glucose data, some people have shared it with me, is you might be doing a correction and you're getting half a unit or quarter unit. It's not correcting, it's not driving up your TDI fast enough to where you need to be. So if all your settings, you started around 20, but you actually need to be at 25, well, it might take 2 months of just normal correct when you're high type of strategy for it to start getting that average up from 20 to 25 or 20 to 30.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That makes sense. Hey, let me ask you a question about
Does that make sense?
It does, actually. Let me ask you a question about Omnipod 5 that even though I've had people tell me directly from the company, I see so many people online saying the opposite that it even makes me wonder if I understand what I'm saying. Once you set up Omnipod 5 on day one, you tell it, this is my basal rate, this is my correction factor, these are all the things it's asking, blah, 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 go into auto mode. First day it uses your settings, and then after that it's doing what it wants to do. If I go back into my settings and change my basal or my insulin action time or my carb ratio, that doesn't touch automation, right? That you're just changing your settings for manual. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right.
And we've been fortunate, myself and a few others who did another Omnipod 5 video with the Loop and Learn group. We've been fortunate to have a lot of discussions directly with Omnipod. So we asked a lot of these questions of their chief of medicine. And there's no speculation on that one. Is target is the only setting that changes automation.
Yep.
Now, it can feel like some of the other settings fix things. For instance, if you artificially lower duration of insulin action from 4 to 2 hours. But the reason it feels like that's improving things is you're essentially faking the bolus calculator into thinking you need a correction sooner. So it's offering a manual correction sooner. It could be if you just click to do a correction, or it could be added on to a meal dose. And that not only brings you down at that time of that dose, but that also increases your total daily insulin over time. But the one dilemma there with trying to change some of these other things that may not need changed is that if you're using a lower DIA, once your total daily insulin is where it needs to be, that can actually cause lows or roller coaster effect from having too strong, too much corrections going on once the system gets you figured out. So if you actually look at the insulin action curves, like from the clinical trials, they're all 6 hours. But the reported IOB on the controller and the DIA that's used by the user setting is actually a straight line. It's a straight line insulin decay of the insulin action. rather than this smooth curve.
Yeah.
And what I've seen is that somewhere between 4 to 5 hours makes the reported IOB using this straight line most accurate to the actual curve, which is, a smooth curve, not a straight line. But that target setting is the only thing to do. And all these others just affect like either the IOB you're seeing or other things like that with the bolus calculator.
Yeah. Also, you put yourself at risk for when you do switch back to manual mode. Your settings are way too aggressive and will make you low then as well. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody online say, oh, I figured out how to make an adjustment to blah, blah. I changed XYZ and now automation's working better. And I'll come in and I'll say, the changes that you made did not change automation. Those are only changes to your manual settings. No, you're wrong. And I'm like, no, you're wrong. What am I going to do? Now I'm on Facebook going, nah, to somebody. So I'm like, listen, that's not how it works. You might be seeing it that way. But by the way, not everything. A lot of people see ghosts in diabetes all the time. They think they are seeing something and they're not. They're misconstruing one thing for another. It happens constantly. And we're learning it here. You mentioned it earlier, going from MDI to a pump, it's not apples to apples. You can't just take your MDI settings and put them in the pump and they're absolutely going to work. You can't take your pump settings and put them to an algorithm. They're absolutely going to work. You can't take your Omnipod 5 settings and put them in a loop or Control IQ or whatever the Medtronic thing is called. You can't do that. Like they're not all the same. And what happens is what you alluded to earlier with the basals, that people get started, their settings are all messed up. They start having problems and then they make adjustments to settings that fix the problem they're seeing, but don't fix the original problem. It's just patches over top of patches over top of patches. And before you know it, you're having success and you don't know why. You don't know how it's working. It's just working. It's somewhat akin to when I bought my first house and we found one day in a dark corner in a hallway that someone had taken masking tape, covered a hole and painted over it very quickly. Yes, the wall looked okay from a distance, but it wasn't right, John. And so, and that ends up being that, I think, is why you hear Omnipod, the company, saying so strongly to people, this is about total daily insulin. This, and start around 50-50, please. Take your total daily insulin, split it in half. Half of that's going to be your basal. Like, just because that's how the algorithm's going to have the best chance of figuring it out. Like, the part that's not being said by anybody is you're probably doing this wrong. And you're wrong. And, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that.
No, because it's working in the end. It only becomes wrong when you try to go into something like an automated system that needs it to be accurate.
Different.
Yeah. So anyway,
and one thing you mentioned the basal stuff is I always called it basal creep. Is usually the first answer you see from if someone posts, hey, I'm rising at this time, raise basal. Like historically with traditional therapy, that was usually the first answer out of anybody's mouth is basal needs changed. Well, when you start looking at algorithm math that's tracking more things, and I have reviewed Loop's algorithm, the results of Omnipod 5's algorithm. I can't actually look at the math. And I've even done consulting work for a startup that has a different algorithm, where I've seen how they're approaching this. I really believe that most people, their basal, if they're coming from a traditional therapy, whether it be pump or MDI, their basal is probably covering at least 20% of their carbs.
Yeah.
And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that because it works in that system. It's easier in that system to just sort of smooth out the fat and protein and things like that, or carb miscounts with a higher basal. But then when you switch that and try to apply it to an algorithm, it just blows up. And it'll blow up Loop and it'll blow up Omnipod 5 just the same. And I do feel like Omnipod 5 makes it easier, though, by that system you said of just focus on TDI. Don't worry about if you have a rise in the middle of the night or feet on the floor or whatever. As long as you focus on TDI, it should be able to handle those types of fluctuations.
Mm-hmm. John, I think this is a great example of the past still impacting the present, because this all goes back to, if you talk to old endos, right, they would over basal people who wouldn't consistently be injecting for their food. And so the people were always seem to have uncovered food in their system. So they're like, well, we'll just jack the basal up to try to take care of that. And the person who made that decision for that person on day one was probably a good decision, but then over time, it just becomes how things get done. And nobody remembers back to the first time. Like, why did we do this? It's because Bill wouldn't inject for his lunch. That's why. You know what I mean? But like, so it becomes the way things happen. And then before you know it, you go through a generation of doctors and a generation of people. And that's just what happens. Like we are seeing right now, the remnants of people not understanding how to manage insulin, all the way back into the late 80s. And, and now it's still impacting things, and we're still having trouble explaining it to people. And algorithms are just going to make it more present now and obvious that most people's settings are not right. And it's fast. I mean, it's not fascinating. It's exactly what I expected, but this is the next problem, right? Like, are you going to teach people, which seems impossible, or are you going to come up with an algorithm that one day just is so good it doesn't matter? Do you think that's where this is headed? Like, when people talk about one day you're not going to have to put in your carbs.
I think it has to be headed that way. And one of the big reasons, and I was floored when I started researching carb counting. So I found quite a few studies on carb counting. I was curious, is it even accurate? Even if we measure precision, is it even accurate?
Right.
And it blew my mind that, so one study, they were only within sort of the acceptable tolerance 44% of the time on their carb counting.
Wow.
So the acceptable tolerance was like, if you look up what a medium-sized apple will be, it'll be like plus or minus 3 grams from this. So it gives a range. Mm-hmm. So even with that, though, so 44% of the time, they were within like 3 to 5 grams of what the actual carb count was. And I don't know what everybody's carb ratios are, but for Lily, that could be a whole unit.
Yeah.
And a whole unit's the difference from ending a meal at 200 versus 100 at times, depending on circumstances. Another study, it was adolescents, and this has piqued my curiosity because we're going through this phase where Lily, we're trying to let her do everything on her own and only intervene when things go off the rails. Only 23% of adolescents were within 10 grams of the actual carbs. Mm. And when you look at that and you're like, okay, we're basically as human beings not capable of accurately counting carbs. And it's not just because people are, guessing wrong, not trying, things like that. It's because
it's too many variables.
All these variables going into food, and like a bowl of Cheerios, you could easily be off by 5 to 10 grams every single time. So I think we have to get to the point where the algorithms are smart enough to start dosing on the rise. And some are already headed that direction. Android APS is already headed that direction with unannounced meals. And I do know some people who don't enter carbs and use those systems, and use them probably better than we use a system where we bolus for meals.
Yeah. I've already interviewed him and I can't think of his name. I just haven't put it out yet. I can't. He's an Australian guy. Is the person you're thinking of?
No,
you're thinking of
the one I'm
else.
thinking. Yeah, I'm thinking of somebody else.
All right. Yeah. So, yeah. Listen, if I took a whiteboard right now and I said, John, let's you and I go through all the variables that might make your bolus wrong, I think we'd write down 50 things by the time we were done. So that's
absolutely.
Yeah. That's why people who listen to the podcast who are not using an algorithm, or just out there working on their own, trying to figure things out. It's why they have so much success after they listen to the podcast, because I say, I don't care what the carb count is. I care how it's going to hit. And then you'll learn historically, this plate of food is, 8 units of insulin for me. And it doesn't matter if you count it up and come up with 7 units, or you count it up and come up with something else. You've eaten this before. It's taken 8 units. Let's go with 8. It's why my daughter's successful, because she's aggressive. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, she doesn't look at something and go, well, this is probably 10, but it could be 12. She's just like 15. So, and you're not pre-bolusing correctly anyway, so you probably need a little more to begin with. And you know what I mean? Like, it's all like, there is a vibe to it. Like, you can get through life with a 5A1C, just vibing with how to bolus for things. You just have to be right about it.
And, a funny thing about the A1C also is we don't worry about it as much as we used to. And I know a lot of people are going more towards focusing on time and range and stuff like that. But I was talking with a colleague about why the GMI shown in Clarity used to be called an estimated A1C. Now they call it GMI. Why is that usually so far off for everybody? For us, it's usually half a point higher than what her actual A1C is. And I was shocked by some of the stuff I learned. A1C is so weighted towards recent that the last week can shift your A1C by half a point. Mm-hmm. So there is some truth to, I have an endo appointment next week, I better start, taking care of myself.
I was going to say
because
people sniff the endo appointment coming up and they start paying more attention all of a sudden.
That could drop your A1C from 6 to 5.5.
Yeah.
The other thing I learned was that the actual lab A1C tests that are used in the hospitals can be off by 6%. So that's a range of like 6 to 6.4 or 5.7.
Yeah.
So we don't worry about, got to hit 5.8 or whatever. If it's like, if she's coming in at 6, I'm thrilled, because that's in a healthy range, no matter what that spread is. So we're really shifting more towards this approach of, kind of goes along with the carbs. What you said with carbs is, you don't need all this exactness. There's too many variables in the world, in physiology, to be able to get any of this exact.
Yeah, you do not want to be in a situation where your last A1C was 6.2 and the next one was 6.4, and you're running around for 3 months going, I failed. Like, it's just
exactly
it's nominal. It might be meaningless, and
it could have actually been better when it said 6.4, because that day the test was running at the high end of the tolerance that was allowed by the FDA.
John, one of the most difficult things you'll wrap your head around when you have diabetes, or you're caring about somebody who has diabetes, is that your meter, when you test your blood sugar and you're like, it says 85, that your blood sugar is probably not 85. that it could be 95 or 73, or like, wherever in the range that the meter you're using, where its accuracy is, anyway.
Well, because the FDA allows 20% on meters, like they do on Dexcom.
Right. So you test your blood sugar, it's 80, it could be 100, it might be 60. You test it, it's 100, it might be 120, it could be 80. And the day you give yourself up and go, I can't worry about that. I'm looking for stability. I am looking for stability. I am looking for not a bunch of ups and not a bunch of downs, because I got it on day 4. John, day 4, my daughter had diabetes, and the girl, that made me sound old. The nurse came in the room. That really did make me sound old. The nurse came in the room with our new meter, which was this like freestyle thing that I've described in the past as looking like it came out of a bubblegum machine, which is now not a good description because I don't think you can get bubblegum out of a machine anymore. And it was just this janky little plastic thing. And she brings in this giant thing that the hospital owned. And she tests Arden's blood sugar on the hospital thing because she's got to write it down. And then she goes, here, now you do it with this meter. And I tested with the meter, and the hospital thing and the meter they gave me were nowhere near each other.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, wait. I was like, what do I do? And she's like, just use that meter. I'm like, but it's like 30 points different than what you just did. She goes, it'll be fine. And I realize now she didn't know what the hell she was talking about. She was just like, look, man, what she wanted to say was, this is the meter you get, dude. Good luck. Like, you know, like make the best of it. Because you never see people test with one meter, then test with another one. Like, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, I always tell them, pick one of the meters and throw the other one in the trash. because of what you've been explaining. And it's just, I think that's brilliant. I have to tell you, my daughter's off in college now as a freshman, and her A1C went up like I don't know, she went from like 6.1 to 6.4 or something like that the last time. But she's been doing exactly what Lily's doing. Is we do not intervene almost at all. Like, there are days I don't even think about Arden's diabetes anymore. Like, you know, the last time I thought about it was when she was sitting down doing homework and her sight was getting old. And I could see the algorithm bolusing and it couldn't move her off this number. And I was like, Arden, you got to stop what you're doing for a second, change your pump. You know, and then she fought with me about it it felt like hours, and then she finally did it. But, you know, there's also the psychological component in there. Like, I don't want her to just not want to listen to me anymore. So there was a reason why. I'll tell you what went through my head the other day when I was going through this. There was a reason why she couldn't get to it. She's not ignoring it. I know she isn't. And I had just spoken to a person who has had diabetes for, I'm going to say 30 some years, and you're all going to think it was Jenny, but it's not. But a person who has had diabetes for 30 some years, who probably lived with A1Cs in the 9s for a long part of their life. And that person was like a little like, I love it when I see people like worried about their 6.5 A1Cs. You know, she's like, that's going to be okay. And and it was, but I take everyone else's point, because you'll hear other people say, well, why can't I get normal A1Cs like a person without diabetes? You can if you want to. Just, you know, you're going to work at it more.
And what concerns me with that last comment is parents with kids transitioning. And I felt us starting to get to that point, transitioning from where Lily's at now, just about done with her junior year of high school, to where Arden's at in her freshman year of college. Is that transition, to me, felt like, oh my gosh, we should have started preparing for her to handle this fully much sooner.
Yeah. We've been doing it since like her junior year of high school.
Yeah. And my concern is when your kid's little and you're controlling absolutely everything, you know, you're fully measuring every single meal for carbs, you're exactly pre-bolusing, all of that type of stuff. Well, that just goes out the window when they start having their independence. And Lily does fabulous at managing on her own, but she's still a 17-year-old kid.
Right.
So there's times when she boluses as she's eating, you know, for boluses after she's started eating. And I worry about burnout from both parents and kids when you're so focused on this, you know, exact A1C number or an exact time in range or exactly counting every single carb. Lily's actually been using Afrezza for the last about a month now as a supplement, because sometimes she actually goes to two different high schools and drives from one to the other right at lunch. So sometimes she doesn't even have time to pre-bolus by the time she gets there. So she'll just take a little bit of Afrezza to offset and dose a slightly less on the pump. But again, it's not being specific about exact amount of carbs. It's okay, it's going to be about this. And, adding this one cartridge of Afrezza will help to cut out the rise from not pre-bolusing, but we don't know how many carbs. She doesn't know how many carbs it actually was. Just how many units did she take?
Yeah. Do you know that Arden figured out how to over bolus meals that she couldn't pre-bolus for just by watching me do it? I don't think we ever spoke about it. Like, I don't think we ever spoke about it. And she just one day, I was like, hey, that was a big bolus. I texted her at school one day and she goes, yeah, I couldn't put it in until I sat down. And I was like, oh, and she's like, well, I'm just bolusing for the rise that's going to come. I was like, wow. She didn't even listen to the podcast, John.
Yeah. That's the great thing about the algorithm pumps is you can steal basal from the future,
right,
to help prevent that rise from eating. I have noticed Omnipod 5, you got to go a little less than you do on Loop. Loop would cut basal immediately and, it'd ride out much easier. But with Omnipod 5, I've noticed we dose a little bit less of that sort of extra up front because it'll keep basal on for longer.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. I eventually I will get an email from someone that's like, why don't you talk about MDI more? I'm like, I already talked about it. I know how to, the way you use insulin with a pump, with a regular old pump, is the way, if you want to have those outcomes, you would do it with MDI. I'm always interested when people are like, well, I want more tricks for MDI. I'm like, well, there aren't a ton of tricks for MDI. Like,
yeah, my biggest trick for MDI would be to get an iPort because it makes it easier to do all those extra doses.
Right.
Because you're not taking that extra shot.
Exactly. And I know, and it's not lost on me while we're having this conversation. Like, we're talking about, really think about what we're talking about, right? If you're talking about Omnipod 5, then you have insurance that pays for Omnipod 5. You can afford a Dexcom. You have likely have a cell phone. Like, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And even like with you, like you just said something so offhandedly. It was like, I'm like Lily's supplementing with Afrezza. You good luck going to your endo and telling her you also want some inhaled insulin for times, because your endo is going to be like, yeah, get away from me. So
and we had to get prior authorization to add it, and even then it was that extra tier. So our prescription copay on that was even more, but because she's supplementing it's not nearly as much as like her Novolog.
Yeah, no, she's not using as much of it. No,
she's not using as much of it.
John, I'm not coming down on you. I'm saying that it's, we're in this moment where care is shifting, right? Like, let me just say, I'm not a soothsayer. I can't see the future. But if we could get a CGM and an algorithm on everybody who had diabetes and needed insulin, a vast majority of these people would be better off health-wise. And so,
today.
Right. And so you have to go ahead.
Although there's something coming up that has had us thinking, it's to me looking like the 1 week basal might be released this year finally. And if you look at a 1 week basal that, keeps you steady for your long acting for the whole week, if you were to combine that with Afrezza for your meal dosing, that Afrezza from what we've seen in the month of using it is so much more forgiving. You don't have to carb count. Is this plate small, medium, or large? That's essentially your carb counting. That the combination of that might actually be drastically better than even the algorithms. At least today. Right. And to be honest, it's something we might try once that's out. We've actually chatted about it on whether that might be a simpler way to manage than using an algorithm pump. So we'll see, but nobody knows until it's out.
Yeah. How did you get over, because you seem like a bright guy, so this went through your head, I'm guessing. How'd you get over the idea of inhaling it? Like that's a leap, right?
Yeah. Well, I had a Zoom call with their CEO, so he convinced me. He had a lot of data on Afrezza, and I mean, it's just from everything I've seen about it, the results are undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
For it, the action time is as fast as the human body's insulin.
Okay.
So that's why it's such a game changer if, we can get sort of the combination of how to best use it with long acting or with a pump that's just sort of a reverse untethered, your pump doing your long acting and slight adjustments. But the inhaling part itself, Lily was a little apprehensive at first, but she got the hang of it. And, the only thing I had to do is I had to email her school and give them a heads up that, hey, if she shows up in the office from a teacher sending her down there for vaping, that she's just taking her insulin. That was the hardest part about the inhaled part of it.
Yeah. It's really cool. I'm just saying, I don't even mean that. I just mean like the idea of taking something into your lungs over and over again. Like that is off-putting to me. That's all. Like based on nothing other than I hear that and my brain goes, we should probably be worried about that. And I don't know. You know what I mean?
So there was one from, I think it was Pfizer. I think it was from Pfizer. It was Exubera was the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And they pulled it from the market, but there was a lot of misinformation out there on why it was pulled. And I even heard doctors say it was pulled because of lung issues, but it was basically pulled because they did a horrible job with the inhaler. It was like a foot long.
It was a foot long. What am I going to do with that, John?
I mean, it was gigantic. It was like holding a bike pump up to your mouth to do it. Where the new one is, it's maybe 2 inches long. The one from Mankind for Afrezza.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no studies out there that say it's harmful or anything like that.
No, I'm not saying there is, by the way. I'm just saying like it strikes me as like worrisome. Like, and could be based on nothing. I wonder if that's not a hard thing to get over. I also keep wondering why someone hasn't just bought the company yet.
Maybe they're not for sale. Maybe they don't want to. I don't know those details.
Yeah,
but I will say, so you do need to do a spirometry. I don't know how to pronounce it. Basically a functional lung test before you start. So you go in, you basically blow in a tube like 5 times or whatever, and then they gave her, I don't know if it was not a steroid, but almost like an asthma inhaler type of breathing treatment.
Yeah.
And then once that sets in, you repeat the test. So they make sure that your lung function is what it should be. Mm-hmm. And also that, like, if you take an inhaler, it doesn't improve drastically because that would indicate you have some issues.
I see.
So you do that at the beginning, and then after 6 months, and then they recommend yearly after that. And that's just to make sure that long-term you don't develop any issues. But I think the biggest reason for that seems to me like it's, if somebody had asthma and maybe didn't even know it, or it got worse in the future, things like that, it can not necessarily be the right insulin to take.
Yeah, I'm not
if
against
you have asthma or COPD.
Yeah, I'm so worried that, like, by me playing devil's advocate that I come off like I'm against. I'm not against it. I'm not against it at all. Like I can see a world where Arden would try it as well. And I've spoken to people who swear by it. Like, really are just, doing what you're talking about. They're injecting their basal insulin and using it for meals and having like wonderful success with it. So, and I'm not against anything, by the way. Like whatever's best, I want. You know what I mean? And I want everybody to keep trying. I want all these companies to keep pushing and trying to figure out something better and new. And yeah.
Well, and even whatever's best for each person, because
Right.
Omnipod 5's not going to be the best for everybody. Loop's not going to be the best for everybody. Some people would manage best with complete MDI.
Yeah, and for variable reasons that are hard to figure out at first. Like why does this work better for me, or if this does?
Yeah, the first thing that pops into my head is a lot of people have adhesive reactions, to the pumps and stuff. I'm thankful that Lily doesn't have, bad skin reactions to those adhesives like I see some people posting, because that would probably shift us out of using Omnipod if she was having really bad skin reactions.
Of course.
So there's all kinds of reasons. But the end result is whatever system you're using, your settings need tweaked to get the best results out of that system. And even then, is the best results aren't trying to hit an exact 5.8. It's getting in a good range and a good range over time, not fluctuating every day throughout the day, all day, or even over months.
Yeah, no, listen, you made a point earlier that is not lost on me, which is you can be doing an amazing job for a young kid. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be, but that person is going to leave your house at some point. If you're doing a good job, they're going to move out, which is a weird part about being a parent. And they're going to go live their own life, and they have to be able to intersect with new responsibilities and stresses and all this stuff and still be able to do their diabetes thing. Like that's not as simple. It's not as simply done as it is said. It just, a lot of stuff happens to them. Like I think this about any number of things. Like, if you're eating like super low carb and that works for you, I think that's terrific. I also think if you think you're going to go to a college and eat on campus and be super low carb, you're in for a shock. Because a lot of colleges don't offer foods that might help you with that. And so now you're there, and what do you do? Same thing as if you're always controlling the insulin pump for somebody, and then they get to school and now they're there, and what do they do? Like it's got to be a transferable skill.
And that even if your kid is, highly data statistics and all of that and loves just digging through those numbers, as a parent, all we're dealing with is looking at, this data to figure out what to do. When that transitions to the kid, they have to add that on top of, and I think you sort of hinted at this, they have to add all of that back end sort of management on top of actually doing the management. Taking the insulin, changing their pump sites, refilling prescriptions. And that's a lot to put on a 17, 18-year-old.
Yeah. And that's in a scenario, John, where we're imagining like a kid just being like, I'm going to take care of myself, and actually going and doing it. It's still hard. One of your kids might end up drunk all the time at school, or one of them might end up high as a kite all the time, or you don't know what's going to happen. And I know everyone thinks they know. They think they're like, oh, I know how it's going to go. I've interviewed too many people, John, who will tell me like, it was a big shock to my parents when I ended up in rehab. you know what I mean? Or like,
yeah.
And I'm just going to the extremes here, but you don't know what they're going to have to deal with when they get there. You also don't know how much anxiety and stress they have from diabetes right now that they can't wait to leave the house and try to forget about. And again, you just need to put them in a situation. And like you said, for some people, you throw Omnipod 5 on the kid and the kid doesn't pay much attention to it, and it's still going to work out for them. Or, you can't put a loop on somebody who doesn't want to be, responsible for the things that come with that. I've seen people on Tandem Control IQ think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I've seen people that think it doesn't work. And I don't know if that's true or if they just aren't using it right, but when it happens, it won't matter. Like the reason won't matter. If your thing's not doing what you need it to do, you're going to be in a weird situation where your kid's 1,000 miles away and suddenly their blood sugars are 300 and you feel like there's nothing you can do about it. And they feel like there's nothing they can do about it. And eventually everybody gives up. And I just don't want that to happen. That's all.
Well, and that perfectly explains one of the main reasons we switched Lily to Omnipod 5 is there's less thought that has to go into running the system once it's running smooth. Not having to modify basal or even ever do a basal test. It's basically there's only thing she essentially needs to change in it is carb ratio. If all of a sudden she starts running lower or higher after her meals, just change the carb ratio. And throughout the month, there'll be times when we don't even change the actual setting. She's running low. It might say dose 10 units for the carbs she put in. She'll just dose 8 instead.
Yeah.
It's about knowing how the insulin is going to work and that, I don't need as much this time as I normally do because I've been low today. So for us, it was about simplifying the system for her to try and give her the best chance of success based on her personality and, how she goes about her day to day. And for other people, Loop might be the best for that, or Control IQ or MDI. It's all individual to individual.
Yeah, for a number of different reasons. It's funny. I would think I haven't thought about this while we were recording, but I'm thinking about it now. Like, I would think that if the companies that make the different products that we've talked about heard this, they'd all be upset. They'd all be like, no, don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. But you know what I heard today? I heard that the guy who figured out patches for Loop that I'm using put his kid on Omnipod 5. To me, that's very telling. You know what I mean? And it's not telling that there's something wrong with Loop 3, or it's telling that these things all work for people in certain situations, and that 10 years from now you might be on something else. For me, if Arden couldn't use Omnipod, that would be an issue for us. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like if Loop only worked with a tandem pump, I'd use Omnipod 5. I just wouldn't. I'd say, "Look, you're carrying the thing, just shut up." And she would agree with that. And for somebody else, they don't care about tubeless. There are other people who are like, I've heard people say, I honestly don't care that I'm attached to my pump, and good for them. You know what I mean? Like what? Lily would choose MDI over a tube. So if she couldn't use Omnipod, she would be MDI. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Right. So there's what it is. It's just all, I don't know, John. It's not as confusing as it sounds to people who don't understand. I think people who really know what we're talking about are like, yeah, there's options here. You just pick the one that's right for you. I'm just thinking that, companies are like, well, please use our thing. But that's just, I mean, and they even know, by the way, you've had conversations with people. Yeah, they know it's not for everybody, so.
Well, I have seen, I've been trying to figure out like when Loop might be better for someone versus Omnipod 5. We've never used tandem, so I can't speak much to that, but it does seem like to me, Loop is going to be better for the people who have Loop, not better. Let me back that up. Loop has the ability to achieve better results for people who are low carb and people who have pretty consistent lifestyles. They get up, they eat, they do the same thing pretty much every day.
Yeah.
Omnipod 5 is going to be better for people who either don't know how to tweak their settings, or don't want to, or don't have time to. Right. The people who just basically want something that works without having to think about it as much. Now, obviously, the caveat in there is you have to get your TDI up to the point where it is working like that. But then also, I've seen people with low insulin needs have a difficult time with Omnipod 5. So, some of the really young kids, is I've seen some of them, but I've seen others who have success at it. So I don't know enough to know if, is there something about the algorithm that under a certain TDI, it can't quite achieve as good of results. I tend to think there is, and I think the same in loop is, if you're delivering 0.1 units per 5 minutes to be your basal rate, which is like 1.2 units per hour. Well, at 0.1, you can do increments up or down in 0.05 every 5 minutes. Well, if somebody only has quarter unit basal per hour, they're only getting one click of that 0.05 dose like every 15 minutes. You can't really take that much basal away. There's not as many increments
right
to transition smoothly up and down for the lower insulin people.
I would say that with the exception of what you just mentioned, there's people with that low of need. My takeaway has always been, no matter what the system is that if the system's egregiously working, if it's that far off, if you're experiencing a ton of highs or a ton of lows, that boils down to settings and your understanding of how to use insulin. Like it doesn't work that badly. None of them. Like none of them are that bad. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm that's the wrong phrasing, but if you're like crashing low all the time and jacking up super high and crashing low, you can't point to the algorithm and go like, that's that fault. It's the control IQ's a problem. Like that thing's not set up correctly. But you don't know how to use it. Same with Loop or Omnipod 5. If you're having if it's all over the place like that, the worst thing you can do is step back and go, the thing doesn't work. Like it's, it's you know what I mean? Something's wrong that could be adjusted.
And for the most part, what I see with people posting that with Omnipod 5 is their starting settings were basically what they were using before, which doesn't work. Lily's carb ratio got 30% more aggressive. So she went from 1 to 7.5 or 6.5 throughout the day. Yep. She's now 1 to 4.5. That's drastic change. And that's coming from Loop, which is also an algorithm. So even from Loop, it needed a drastic change. So for Omnipod 5 users, it seems to be they're not increasing their carb ratio. If they'd increase their carb or make it more aggressive right out of the gate, even if their TDI was too low, that would get them in line much quicker. So they wouldn't be riding in the 250s, 300s all the time. They might be at 200 until TDI catches up, but it'll be catching up much faster 2 or 3 pods in.
Yeah.
And then for systems that use basal in the algorithm, I think it's people that don't have a grasp for sort of how insulin works and how basal works with, sort of like the phrase I mentioned before is the first response was always, increase basal. Well, it's normally fat and protein in my experience. Like I'm going to say it's fat and protein until it's proven that it's not fat or protein. Yeah. That's really my take on that. I actually had quite a few loopers who look at this, like midnight to 3 a.m. rise. I'm sure you've seen the graphs for that. And then point to several studies that'll show that, there's a typical growth hormone rise at that time. So you raise basal at that time. Well, the test I tell people to do is don't have any carbs or don't have any fat or protein in your meal within 6 hours of going to bed. And anything you eat after that, make sure it's at least 3 hours before going to bed and it's 100% carbs, like a bowl of completely dry cereal. It's just pretty much zero fat or protein.
Right.
And you know what happens every single time?
That the rise goes away. Yeah.
There is zero rise, and they have a perfectly flat night. Now, it is growth hormone. You can say it's growth hormone, but growth hormone is triggered by gluconeogenesis from the fat and protein. So it's, you know what I mean? The culprit is actually the meal.
Yeah. It's fascinating how infrequently we talk about things like digestion, nutrition, things like that. We tend to want to treat diabetes like a math problem always. Like there's 15 carbs. That's all. It's 15. That's 3 units for me. Didn't work. Something else must be wrong. Could it be? Yeah. Could it be that that you ate something that's laying in your stomach like a brick and can't be digested very quickly because people aren't supposed to eat a half a pound of mozzarella cheese?
Well, and to add on to that is the conversions for fat and protein from your meals, they're not going to always be the same. Like
right.
For the most part, a carb is a carb. Yeah, obviously it's not, but it's pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had lower, glycogen or something like that, stores, your body's going to replenish those. It's going to potentially use more fat and protein to replenish those. If you have a high carb meal with high fat meal, it's going to convert less fat than a low carb meal with fat and protein.
Yeah.
So all of those, you can't just, I know we started with that. I forget the book reference that everybody uses, but where you do the 25% at this time and 50% at this time for the fat and protein. Mm-hmm. But the more I got into it, the more I realized you might as well put a blindfold on and throw a dart and just guess. So
it's more insulin.
Now,
John,
now we're like, okay, take a unit or take 2 units. It's
right.
that's the math we do is, you need another unit or you need another 2 units.
Yeah. I've made quite a few people situation better by dumbing it down to if your blood sugar's high, you don't have enough. And if your blood sugar's low, you have too much. And that really ends up just being true. Like if your blood sugar is going up and it's going up and up and up, we can all sit around and talk about like, well, maybe I didn't pre-bolus or my insulin to carb ratio might be off, or there could be fat or protein in this that I didn't account for. But here's the real truth. Blood sugar's going up. You know what makes it come down? Insulin. Let's go.
Insulin.
Yeah. So.
And you also see so many people that post like, well, can I do a correction now? Things like that. And my first thought is always, it's only stacking if you don't need the insulin.
Right.
So you figure out how the insulin works, and then you can know just almost going to say, by gut feel, but really that gut feel is the billions of pieces of data your brain has already processed. About how much you need to take based on that blood sugar.
If you want to know the uphill battle that we're all against, I saw a post the other day that asked the very serious question: how did you correct a blood sugar 2 hours after the meal and not have Child Protective Services called on you? And they weren't kidding. Like they were talking about something from their life. So, it was a thing at school where the kid, bolused, they missed, and they had the nurse add on extra things. And the person asking the question was seriously saying, how did Child Protective Services not get called? And I'm like, wow, if that's in someone's head, none of you have any chance. Like,
yeah, we've corrected while she's still eating. We've corrected 15 minutes after the meal dose.
Yeah.
Because we're like, that was definitely not enough. We know already after 15 minutes.
There are times in Loop when the pump is still pumping, and I tell Arden, go back in there and add 10 more carbs to that. And she's like, I have to wait till it's done. I'm like, all right, well, wait till it's done and then put 10 more carbs on that, because that's not going to be enough.
Lily obviously hasn't gone to the nurse in years. She's been independent at school, but when she was, we actually had it written that the nurse calls the parent for meal doses.
Yeah.
So the nurse wasn't allowed. Now, she started in middle school, so it wasn't like a tiny little kid, but
Right.
we would talk to her on the phone and we would tell the nurse what to dose.
But just imagine that statement. So the person making the statement is living a life where they don't even understand how to manage their diabetes. They think they do, but they don't. The nurse doesn't know what they're talking about. And obviously someone has called the state on somebody at some point for doing the right thing and being told it's the wrong thing. It's just fascinating.
Yeah. And the problem is there anybody up that chain all the way to CPS and doctors or whoever that would actually know that
No, John.
They would be doing the right thing.
John, somehow it's a guy who started making a living selling iPhone cables and a guy who was a stay-at-home dad and some lady who blah, 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 and this person over here and, and whoever the hell Ivan is. And like, you know what I mean? Like these are the people who understand how insulin works.
Yeah.
Jenny.
Yeah,
there are people who understand how insulin works, and none of them are, it feels like, are in a position to help anybody. Like, and that's why, when you stop and look at like the incredible success that the podcast has had, it's because it actually has a way to reach people. Like, so
yeah, it allows average people like you and me to share our experiences, but not basically say, here's what your medical advice is to do.
Without some nudnik riding in on a sheriff's going like, the thing says 3 hours. Like, what? Great. You don't know what you're talking about. No one knows what they're, listen, you're lucky when you bump into a doctor that knows what they're talking about. And now I'm expecting just random people to understand who are in some bureaucratic chain. I don't know how I've gotten off on this thing at the school because it's fascinating. The point should be, you should distill down everything that was just said into this idea. There's no rules. It's what works. Like, find what works and do what works. And if it's not working, then keep looking. Don't just throw your hands up in the air and say like, well, that's just diabetes. Like, he just gets high at 3 a.m. It's not that easy. I mean, listen, the high at 3 a.m. thing from like the fat and protein here, how many people are on antacids and experience heartburn overnight, right? You're going to bed with a stomach full of food that you probably shouldn't have eaten to begin with, and your digestion slows down while you're sleeping. So it just sits in there, and that's what happens. You're going to get Barrett's. You want that? You don't. Look it up, okay? You don't want that. So, like, just don't eat a slab of beef with cheese on it and spaghetti sauce at 9 p.m. Like, eat that earlier in the day if you're going to eat that. Like,
well,
go ahead.
That reminds me of, you see the posts of, why am I gaining weight now that I started insulin? And you see people saying, oh, well, insulin, it's known that insulin can make you gain weight. And my non-medical brain is like exploding over here saying, no, you gain weight for basically the same reason that anybody gains weight.
Calories.
Except having high blood sugar is coincidentally a nice diet to lose weight.
Yeah,
because
it's also an eating disorder and a really unhealthy way to be. And so, right. Yeah, I know what you mean. Your
glucose isn't getting into your cells. Now it is, and you're eating too much, so that glucose is getting converted to fat.
But see, John, where your brain and my brain says, so obviously, blah, blah, blah. There are other people's brains who go, so if I don't take insulin, then I'll never gain weight. They don't think about like what's going to happen to them, 5 years from now. And that's, and boy, you know what? If this conversation has revealed one thing, it's how many patches there are. It's going all the way back to your basal, like, because you said about basal what I would have said in the beginning. If you've got 5 different basal rates, you're just covering up other problems. Like, this is that you haven't figured out something magical. You have other problems that could have been fixed that you've put a patch on. But so much of it, care through school, everything's being patched. Like, that's the problem with diabetes care and probably about everything else in the world, is that we've been around so long that we don't know why we're doing what we're doing anymore. We just started with a thing. The next decision was wrong. Then someone patched it. Then the next decision was right. Then 2 decisions in a row were wrong. Then somebody threw a patch on it. Now you're 50 years later and you're riding this motorcycle that's held together with duct tape, but it's running. And so you're like, yeah, it's all good. But then you start making decisions based on what you're seeing, and what you're seeing isn't right. It just works. But I don't know if that all makes sense to everybody, but trust me, if you step back far enough, you can see everything's, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here because I'm not, right? But society is being held together with luck and spit, okay? And so is your diabetes, but it doesn't have to be. You can get one of these systems, get good settings, start over, and have success based on what it's supposed to be based on. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
it does, but and I don't know if this statement is in agreement with that or in disagreement with that.
Doesn't matter to me, John. Just talk. Go ahead.
But it's a lot more black magic than science, if you will. So it's science, don't get me wrong, on managing. Mm-hmm. But we are looking at, let's take Omnipod 5. I can change basically 5 settings that control what the pump does. And only one of those controls the automation. The others just control the bolus calculator. Mm-hmm. 5 things. There are probably 5 million variables physiologically, environmentally, well, and I'd say sort of like emotionally, which ties into physiologically, like stress or whatever, and even technologically. How, is the cannula at a 1 degree angle from where it's supposed to be that causes that drip to just be slightly less? So we're looking at 5 variables to try and manage something that has millions mm-hmm. of individual things that can completely make it go off the rails.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why I so much like your comment before about sort of not worrying. Is it 30 carbs or 35 carbs? It's
what
10
works.
Units or whatever.
Yeah.
It's what works, because the reasons that I dosed for the same thing today that I did yesterday, and yesterday was perfect, and today I'm 250. The reasons are those other 495,000 variables or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's that, the temperature was 1 degree hotter and my skin was slightly warmer, and so the injection didn't quite absorb in the exact same manner as it did yesterday.
Yeah. Oh, no, 100%. I just meant on the settings side. Like getting, like, that stuff can be right. It can be, or at least better than you have it. Like if you've been patching and patching and patching, you don't know what your basal is anymore. Like you said, your daughter's insulin to carb ratio was what, 1 to 4.5?
Yeah.
And I bet you many people were like, oh my God, that's insane. You know why you know why I didn't say that, John, right? Because that's about what my daughter's ratio is. And so it's just, but her basal is also not like, super high. And so like it's, and she's got an algorithm working for it. Boy, the one thing you mm-hmm. said earlier that makes, I'll tell you, if you ask me why an algorithm is great, it's being able to steal basal from the future. The way you put that, I love that about being able to use a loop. To just say like, look, she's about to eat something. We're not pre-bolusing, right? It's going to hit her so hard. You can literally put in like 2 hours of basal into the bolus. And if it's too much, then the algorithm just keeps taking the basal away. And it's the only way I can tell people to like imagine it in their minds is like if you, like a scale of justice, like a big scale, right, on 2 sides. And the algorithm is just faster than you can think about it. There's carbs on one side and insulin on the other of this scale. And the algorithm is just like takes all the insulin off of the scale, and as soon as it sees it start to go the other way, it's like, here, take the insulin back, and then it keeps it back, and there's, oh, too much, too little, more, less, and it's adjusting in the moment, and
well, that's why it's also important to know that 2.1 times number for basal IOB, because like a loop shows negative basal, which it drives me crazy because it's just a made up thing. Because if your basal is 1 unit per hour, when loop shows 0, you have 2.1 units on board. If loop shows -1, you still have 1.1 units on board. But knowing that number of at any time, if the algorithm has been cutting my basal, well, I know that my basal is keeping me right about 2.1 IOB at all times. Well, that tells me approximately how much I can add in, even from what had been cut from the last hour, for instance. Like last night, Lily was like 85 for 4 hours, probably, from like 7 p.m. until 11 or something. She came home, wanted to eat before bed, and I just said, look and see if basal has been cut. And if it has, you probably want to add an extra unit, because I knew that, the IOB in her system from the removed basal before would need to be added back.
Yeah.
And that would make that meal hit harder.
Does she think of that on her own? Because that's something Arden doesn't track still.
I'm trying to get her to do that more. So I'm just doing reminders, and then not necessarily following up to make sure she does it. Like our newest thing is she goes to bed way later than we do, and she usually wants to go eat half of the kitchen at midnight. So our newest thing is just telling her, hey, check where you're at when you're falling asleep. And if you're still rising and not coming down from that food, you need to consider how much more to add, because we all know it's going to start slowing down as soon as she falls asleep.
Yeah.
And that's going to make her rise more. So she's getting there, not fully, but she's definitely getting there with that type of stuff.
I knew Arden was going to get high this morning because she had class at 8 a.m. and her blood sugar's been like 90 for 24 hours. Like, she's just been super stable for like a whole day. And she spent the whole day in her room doing homework. She had a couple of meals, but they were smaller. And she's going to get up this morning. She's going to go to that horrible cafeteria at that school, John. And I don't know what they feed them. And, she made a big bolus. She was on top of it for the first few hours this morning. It was working. But then she ate again on top of it. And I was like, oh, here we go. Like, so she's going to go to like 190, 200. It's going to sit there for a little while and it's going to come back. And it's funny because I think a lot of people listening to that are like, really? Is this what you're worried about? Like, that's not so bad. And I don't judge it as bad or not. It's just where she's at now and her understanding of the impact of the food she has, what her schedule's like all that stuff. But if she would have thought the way you just said, like, I've been super stable for a long time. Let me look to see if my basal's been cut back, because when I go to bolus here, I'm going to have a deficit, and I'm not going to be covering it. That's the next step. Like, I don't know when she'll get to it, but we're like, same thing with you. Like, I'll mention it once in a while, and I figure one day she'll figure it out.
Well, and that's what's been nice with Afrezza. So Lily went out to get coffee this morning, and I just said, you probably want to take at least one cartridge of Afrezza. So we only have the smallest cartridge, which is 4 units, but it's actually conversion from Novolog. It's like 2.25 units of Novolog. So what she's started doing at times like that, when she knows she's going to have a quick rise for whatever reason, is she'll take 1 cartridge of Afrezza at the same time that she doses the rest on the pump. So the Afrezza helps to knock down that first hour while the Novolog's getting started. And that's actually been pretty amazing to see how it is able to stop the rise with that combination of sort of replacing that replacing that missing basal, but doing it with a Freza because everything's hitting from a 60 carb Starbucks death drink.
I'll tell you, I don't know if Arden would be up for it, but I'd be up for trying it if she was. Just the idea,
I don't think you should necessarily try it yourself.
No. Well, I mean, like, I'd be up for like trying to figure it out with her if she was interested in doing it, Although, it's interesting. You're kind of talking about biohacking a little bit earlier. I was watching this woman online last night. I think she's using the Lilly version of one of those injectables that was first brought out for type 2, but it's been, I guess, FDA approved now for weight loss, and you're seeing a lot of people use it. I don't know what the Lilly one's called.
Yeah, the Ozempic or whatever it's pronounced.
I honestly don't know what it's called. But I mean, I'm just kind of watching this woman on TikTok. She doesn't have diabetes or anything like that. And she's lost like 42 pounds in a month. And I'm like, I'm sitting in bed last night with my wife. I'm like, why is that happening? And she's like, well, it quells your desire to eat. But I'm like, but there's got to be something else going on. Like, she didn't lose 42 pounds from like cutting back on food in a month. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, I want to understand that better. That's like, and
so 1 pound is 3,500 calories. So that's 150,000 calorie deficit in a month. That's like you'd be dead if it was just from cutting down cravings.
That's what I said to my wife. I'm like, that doesn't make sense that it's just cravings. She's like, well, I think it's about how the insulin gets used too. And I'm like, okay. And so I'm like, I'm going to figure that out. I'm going to get somebody on to talk about it.
You know what? I think so when you said that, it clicked something in my brain. I think what it's doing is it's actually dumping the glucose through without it getting into your cells. Okay. So some of the glucose just gets dumped straight through your digestive system.
Interesting.
If that's the one I'm thinking of, because there was one that I was reading about that.
I don't know what it's. Let me take a look. See if I can figure out what it was called. You're saying it's Monjero or something like that? Is that what you thought it was?
Yeah, I don't remember which one. But there was one I was reading that seemed really unusual how it worked. At least part of how it worked.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to find out. I'm going to talk listen, I'd love to talk to somebody about it just to understand what it's doing. And I mean, it's a significant, 42 pounds in a month. And she doesn't look unhealthy. She doesn't look like, I don't know, I'm not there. But I mean, she's not she's not pulling herself on the desk like Gollum going, I'm okay. And I was like, that's really something. Like, something's going on in there. That's not allowing this to get stored the way it would normally without it. And I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. So I'll try to find out about it. Anyway, John, is there anything we haven't talked about that we should? I thought this was a great conversation, and yet I'm not 100% sure what we talked about. So
yeah, we talked about a lot. So I think we talked about everything we should talk about.
Cool.
Oh no, one more thing we didn't talk about. This single most important thing for Omnipod 5. So I started counting how many times a day I was posting this exact same response to people. They put a new pod on. Controller says it can't find the CGM. So basically the pod isn't connecting to Dexcom. And this goes all the way back to G5 restarts, and then you had to do it a lot with Loop in the early days, where what was happening is the pod that you just deactivated is not correctly disconnecting from Dexcom. Okay. So because the pod is taking the place of the receiver, and Dexcom can only be connected to one receiver and one phone at a time, you pull your old pod off, throw it in the trash, it's still connecting with the transmitter, even though it's supposed to be deactivated.
Okay.
So what we do, every single pod change, Lily deactivates the pod. As soon as it beeps deactivated, she throws it in the microwave. Don't turn the microwave on, by the way. Throws it in the microwave, primes a new pod, starts it, connects perfectly every single time, because the microwave has a Faraday cage that blocks Bluetooth signal. So you're basically blocking the old pod from continuing its connection to the transmitter.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the number one tip. I post that more often than anything else to people, because it seems like everybody runs into that. We were at 50% of the pods were having connection problems before we started doing that. Since we started doing that, we've not had a single one that is not connected immediately and reliably.
Go over it again, step by step.
Deactivate the pod, pull the pod off and put it in the microwave, and then prime and pair and start up the new pod, and it will connect. And only after it connects, so on the controller, when you see the actual CGM value showing, only after that happens, pull the old pod out and throw it away.
Okay.
So leave it in the microwave that whole time.
And I'm just going to say this for people who didn't hear Faraday cage and go, oh, I know exactly what that is, John, because you're fancy. But it's used to block electromagnetic fields, right? So a microwave has one, because if a microwave didn't have one, I was going to say my testicles would be burned by now. But,
exactly.
But that's just...
that's the little grid pattern you see in the microwave window. That's the Faraday cage. It's just the wire mesh. And for some reason, a wire mesh causes signals to not be able to escape.
So if your CGM is still improperly connected to the old pod, putting the pod in there basically makes the pod disappear off the face of the earth for the CGM connection.
Yep. Yeah. And we saw about half of the pods having trouble with the connection. And before we started doing that. And once I started doing that, it's not a single one.
Okay.
And all the other things that, like people say, reboot the controller, delete the transmitter, re-enter it, all those types of things, they're all just getting lucky with something with specific timing of maybe when it's trying to ping. The solution is that you have to get that signal no longer connected to the Dex. And the easiest is throw it in the microwave. You could also just throw the pod out down the street.
I was going to say, I'm laughing at how many people have like opened their back door and just thrown it into the yard.
That'll do the same thing. I mean, it's about 50 to 60 feet if you have clear line of sight.
So you got to have a good arm.
Probably the longest it could connect.
Yeah, you got to have a really good arm. So
yeah.
Anyway, well, that's great. I appreciate you adding that in here. Thank you very much. John, listen, let's, I don't normally do this, but let's pimp your thing. So the Sugar Pixel is at customtype1.com, right?
Yes.
Okay. It's a terrific device. Like it's absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
I find it to be on the level of glucose as far as like how valuable it was. Like, cause I did run it while Arden was here, and it was terrific. Now that Arden's gone, I need to set it back up, and I haven't yet, but I kind of need your help a little bit. And, but for the glucose is the same thing. Like it almost just trains you. Like I woke up in the middle of the night last night and I fixed my eyes on where that little glucose thing was, and it was green, and I went good. And I shut my eyes again. And I did the same thing with the Sugar Pixel when I had it set up. Like you open your eyes and you're like, okay, I didn't have to pick up my phone. I didn't have to unlock my phone. All that kind of wakes you up. You know what I mean? Like all the machinations with the phone and everything. When you don't have to intersect with the phone and you can still get a tiny bit of like feedback about blood sugar, it's very helpful, and it doesn't break your sleep as well, or in the same way, I mean. So anyway, do you sell anything else at customtype1.com or just Sugar Pixel?
That's the biggest thing we sell is Sugar Pixel. And I mean, we actually have ideas for other products. I have past Christmas, I actually had on my own Christmas tree a fully functioning version of Sugar Pixel driving my Christmas tree lights. So that might be something you see in the future, is a Christmas tree version of Sugar Pixel. But the biggest reason I made it, I said earlier, was Lily wasn't waking up to alerts, and it could be for any number of reasons. She left her volume too low. She left it on vibrate. all kinds of stuff. She's just sleeping harder. And even then, it's like, even if everything's perfect, the alerts just, it's a tiny iPhone speaker. So I put a giant speaker in it compared to what you have on the phone. And then also have a vibration puck that you slide under the pillow. So you can get audio and vibration.
Yep.
And we just recently added, I think, what has been the most popular feature. We added emoji screens. So there's like 6 or 8 different displays you can choose, depending on if you have one user or 2 users that you're following. But one is emojis. So for little kids that might not be able to read yet, we could just have a single color display so a kid could know green is good, red is bad. But we've also added these emojis. So there's smileys that have all different smiley faces to indicate the BG range. And then there's also icons. So like the urgent low is a lollipop is one of the icons. Urgent high, there's a dumpster fire as one of the icons, which is my personal favorite. And then even unicorn icons. So, little kids get excited. They hit their perfect number and a unicorn icon pops up on the screen with it.
Can I set what my number is for my unicorn?
Yes. That was, cool. Everybody always, you see the posts of 100, but I know a lot of people that use a different number for their unicorn. So we wanted to make sure that was settable.
That's excellent. Jon, that's terrific. Sugar Pixel is at customtype1.com, and the word and 1 is spelled out ONE. So yeah, check it out.
Yeah.
It really is terrific. Is it still like, you're not printing them on site? Like, how do you make them? I guess is my question. Are they manufactured somewhere?
It's a lot of custom work. So all of the plastic components are now injection molded. The first one, you bought it within like the first month. I didn't know if there were going to be 10 people that wanted this or 10,000.
Sure.
So I didn't have the money to invest to build injection molds. So we were 3D printing the housings originally. They're now injection molded. Then we purchase all the individual components from, I think, 5 or 6 different places. And our circuit boards are manufactured here in Akron, Ohio. And then we do all the finished assembly here, no matter where the parts are coming from. So we have parts coming from all over the world.
Wow.
For it. But everything is finished right here, which I like because, it lets me run down right to the factory there if we have to update something or fix something, make changes, things like that.
Jon, how many employees do you have making Sugar Pixel?
So employees in quotes, there are exactly 2 of us with Custom Type 1, but our, we basically rely on outside contract factories for the various pieces parts. So like our LEDs comes from a place that has probably 500 or 1,000 people that are making LED panels. And our circuit board manufacturer, I think they're probably about 20 people. As far as the actual company, if you send an email to our support, you're going to be talking to me. And we're just a small place, which is good and bad. It's good because we connect. I personally can connect with almost everybody, and it's bad because that can sometimes be overwhelming.
Yeah, Jon. You and I are doing about the same thing with a different product. But people, I love getting an email and there's like, hey, can you tell Scott? I'm like, oh, you think there's another person here?
I am Scott.
Yeah. Scott is the guy is the guy. There's no other guy. So
yeah, the funniest ones are the ones that you'll every now and then get somebody coming in with a raving and ranting message that is acting like we're this, multi-billion-dollar, global conglomerate company that they're dealing with.
You tell the CEO that I'm all right.
Yeah. Well, I'm just like, I've actually replied before. I've replied to people before, thanks for your patience. I'm sorry it took me so long. I was up all night with high blood sugars, and so I'm running on a few hours of sleep. So that's why I'm delayed in replying.
I am.
And I think that surprises people that, hey, we're the same as the people that are using our product. So there's going to be days when we might be extra tired and it takes us a little bit longer to reply to emails.
Yeah. I remember when, what was it? Athletic Greens reached out to me because they wanted ads, and they were like, can we talk to somebody in your marketing department? And I was like, that's going to be me. And she goes, well, after that, we need to speak to somebody in accounting. And I was like, yeah, that's going to be me too. So I'm like, it's me. And she goes, but you chart with huge, podcasts, like large companies running them. And I was like, yeah, it's me. It's like, anything you need, use my email address.
Yep.
Why don't you hire people? I'm like, how much money do you think I make doing this? I was like, hire people. I'm barely paying my own bills. What are you talking about? Anyway.
Well, and that actually is funny because we, when we were looking at pricing Sugar Pixel, I wanted it. My main goal is to help people with it. It's a happy benefit that I was able to make it my job. But without cutting corners on the actual product, I look at every single penny that goes into it. And I'm like, okay, to offer phone support, I would have to charge everybody, every single person, an extra 50% of the cost, to be able to hire people to handle phone support.
Right.
And is that actually worth it? Probably not. Because I'd much rather it help way more people, and the handful of people that might need a little extra help getting it set up,
you'll figure it out.
Maybe it takes an extra day over email, but that meant that all these other thousands of people still have an extra $50 in their pocket.
Right. Well, John, I understood your situation because when I got one, you're like, I'll send you one. I was like, well, I'll pay for it, John. You're not going to just send me one. I'm like, I know your situation, I live it too. And so I say to people all the time, I just need you to click on the links for the subscribe for the advertisers. If you listen, if you want to buy a Dexcom, do me a favor and buy it through my link. If you don't want to buy one, don't buy one just to support the podcast. Just use the links if you're going to, and I, every once in a while, and it's not bad, but somebody will come after me. They're like, this is all about money. I'm like, you don't understand what you're talking about. I'm like, if people don't click on those links, bye-bye podcast.
Exactly.
The podcast that you love so much that you're texting me about how much it's helped you. I actually had a person who's told me these words, this podcast saved my life, and you shouldn't have advertisers. I'm like, well, you need to pick one because that's not how the world works. I live inside of a place and my kids go to college and I eat food and electricity, etc. I can't just make you this podcast. I'm an actual person. I have things I need too. So do you want to pay for the podcast? I said to the person privately, I was like, look, if you want, I can just charge you $20 a month to listen to the podcast and we're all good then. You want to do that? Oh, no. Oh, you don't want to do that? Okay. So you don't want to pay for it and you want it to save your life, your words, but I shouldn't make money. How's that going to happen? And then there you go, so.
And that's the hard part. It's we all spend way too much money managing this disease.
Yeah.
But everything can't be free. It's just not how the world works. It would be great if it could. The whole Night Scout issue with Heroku, everybody started initially, they discovered Railway was working, and they started initially pushing everybody over to Railway. And I looked up Railway and I'm like, they're a 12-person startup. And we're going to, as a community, push tens of thousands of free users onto them, they're going to shut that down. They won't be able to afford that service if too many users
right.
just all of a sudden start taking their free service. So it's a fine line on how you deal with all of that. And I think your approach is the most elegant, because it is the big corporations.
Yeah, someone else is paying for it.
Space.
I wanted to tell the person, hey, just say thank you. Okay. Like I figured this out. Like, I got you the information for free. Thank you. And then I'll go, you're very welcome.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure. And like, not like, hey, you're pushing ads. I was like, yeah. Do you want the podcast? Like, I wonder if people think, like, after I record with you, if it wasn't for advertising, it would take me 3 minutes to go to the front of this and be like, hey, everyone, welcome to episode blah, blah, blah of the Juicebox Podcast. Today, John's going to be on the show. We're going to talk about Sugar Pixel and Loop and Omnipod 5. You're going to love it. John's daughter, Lily, like, I could do that. Boom. At the end, say, thanks for coming. See you later. Check out the Facebook page. Instead, I spend hours getting each episode together to put ads on them so that hopefully you'll click on one of the ads if you're going to buy an Omnipod or a Gvoke HypoPen or whatever the hell you're going to buy. And so that those people will then send me money, which, by the way, I don't keep much of because I don't know if you've heard about taxes. And then and I have no overhead. I'm a podcast. So like there's no write-offs.
Yeah.
Like if you want to know who's like supporting all of you through taxes, it's me. Okay. And so then that all happens. And then at the end, I just I mean, my God, like if you want a contour meter, could you just click on the link? Like, I'm not telling you to buy a contour meter. I got pushback from somebody recently. Like, I don't like athletic greens. And I responded, I was like, don't buy it. Like, what do you think you're under like some, like, like it's not a law. If I have an ad, you have to buy the thing, like it's okay. And I'm like, and I respond back. I said, don't buy it. Other people like athletic greens, and those people who use it, if they buy it through my link, you get the podcast for free. Like, do you really want the podcast to go behind a paywall? Because that's the other option.
Yeah.
And then how many people, to your point about Sugar Pixel, then how many people don't get it if you make it more expensive? And I'm like, I don't want to do that. So, and
well, with the podcast especially is, that's along the lines of it's mobile first is a podcast, because you're getting it through your phone, through the app, and it's just like all the app stuff in the app store is. You put an app at $1 next to an app that's free, and nobody's going to buy the $1 one.
You're done. Yep.
So it's almost like you can't put a single dollar amount on the podcast without losing probably the majority of your listeners.
I had a company come to me one time and said, hey, you should put your podcast behind a paywall because, how many listeners do you have? And I said, about this many. How many downloads do you have? About this many. And they said, well, if you just charged 99 cents for a download, this is how much money you would have. And I'm like, yeah, that wouldn't happen. I said, once it's 99 cents, nobody would download it. They're like, sure they would. I'm like, not all of them. And she goes, well, let's say, and I'm sitting at this meeting. I'm like, oh my God, I got to get out of this, and, and they said, well, let's say you lose 3/4 of the people. You still have 1/4 of them. And by the way, the number was impressive. Like if I lost 3/4 of my listeners, the amount of money would have been impressive. Like, trust me, I could have made the podcast for like 2 more years and then like off. And so, and I was like, but I said, but the podcast helps people with their health. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah. So you're telling me that 3 of every 4 people who are now being helped by the podcast are no longer being helped by it for the love of 99 cents? And and I was like, you don't understand what I'm doing. Like, I'm helping people. She goes, no, you have a very popular podcast. You can monetize the hell out of it. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I was like, can you find a way to monetize it where all 4 people are helped with their health? And it doesn't cost them 99 cents. And she goes, well, you would need an ad revenue for that. I was like, yes, I already have that. So you're no help to me at all. And she's like, no. And I'm like, okay, we're done. Thank you. And it's the last one of those calls I've ever taken, because by the way, they come constantly. And what I've come to realize is that she wanted a piece of the pie too. So, like, I was going to make X amount. They were going to take 20% of it. And I was like, or that's the other people that come to me. You should set up a class and charge people $50 for it. And she's like, they would pay that. And I was like, yeah, they would, but they can get it in the podcast for free. And she's like, yeah, but you're not making enough money. And I was like, I don't know what's enough. Like, I do okay. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not over here struggling. Like, what are you talking about? Like, how much am I supposed to make off of this? You know what I mean? Like, it's all just very, I don't know. But then,
well, it's just so opposite of capitalism, basically.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not opposite, but it's not going to the nth degree to make every single penny you can, because it's not entirely about just making a living at this. It's also because we're helping people.
Trying to help people. That I tell people all the time. It's a triad. I help people, I enjoy this, and I pay my bills. You go back 20 years ago, find me and say, Scott, one day you'll have a job that helps people, that you'll enjoy, that will pay your bills. And I'd go like, sign me up. What is that? Who's lucky enough to have that? And so I don't know. I'm not going to wring every red cent out of everybody. Like, it just seems, I don't know, it's dirty. It seems wrong. And by the way, I'm okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like I'm not over here like, going like, oh, how are we going to pay the water bill? So yeah, anyway.
Well,
John, and by the way, I don't care. I'm sorry, John. I don't even think about it right up till you get the one email from one person who's like, "This, like, you just want money." I'm like, "Oh, you have no idea how much money I can make out of this," and that I'm leaving on the table. You son of a bitch. Anyway, I'm sorry.
It's you're maybe more polite than I am. I get those emails and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even reply.
Well, I don't know. Like, I'm not trying to like talk everybody into liking me, but I mean, here's my next thought. I've said this before. Like, you can't, like, the reason you don't tell people, like, I don't understand this thing in society now where people brag about what they have. I saw somebody in the diabetes space do it recently. And I thought, why in God's name would you show anyone that car? Like, what are they going to think? Like, I know what I think when I see it. I think, wow, you're making a lot of money. And you're telling me you're helping people. Like, so let's say, John, that this person's making like a massive amount of money, but they're still helping people. Then, okay. I mean, good for them, right? Like, I don't have a problem in the world with that. I live in America. I'm okay with that. But what I think about is the people who see that are put off by it and stop taking the help. Like, now you've hurt someone else's health so that you could show them you had a fancy car. Just enjoy the car. No one needs to see it. You know, and that I really do think about that, because people can get put off by that. Like, if I made $30,000 a year off the podcast, then somebody making $15,000 a year is going to look at me and go, "Oh my God, look at this guy!" Like, just, I'm not going to listen to this. That person, and I understand that. So, like, I wouldn't want that person to not know how to pre-bolus because I'm making 30 and they're making 15. And so I just think that's a private thing. You just keep that quiet, because no matter how little or much money it is, you're going to end up pushing someone away. Anyway, that's like background.
Well, and so that reminds me, I just got a booth at both Friends for Life and ADA in San Diego in the summer.
Oh, cool.
And in doing that, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to think through how to make the booth look nice, but not too nice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because we can't come across like, oh my gosh, they're selling this for way too much because of how nice their booth is. You know what I mean? So it's like,
see, these are the things that people, and you're in my position, have to think about that other people don't have to think about. And if they got put in this position, they would very quickly understand it. It's not that easy to make something that actually helps people and doesn't offend their sensibilities and all the other things that people can rub up against. I feel it every day on the Facebook page. Like, sometimes there are people who are just like, I'm like, you're not like, you're not getting this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're being nasty and you don't realize it. And then it's my job to tell them that, except I'm the guy on the podcast. So I don't want them to like stop listening because A, it'll hurt the podcast, and B, because they're not going to hear the thing next week that we talk about that might really help them. And so it's always this balancing act. I was like, oh, I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm like, I don't want to be the bad guy. But you're not the bad guy. You look, they're out of their minds, you know?
Yeah. The majority of the people look at those posts and are like, oh my gosh, this guy needs to put in line. Scott, put him in line.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because people will say privately, we'll just block them. And again, I think the same thing. I'm like, no, like they're having some sort of an issue right now. They'll get through it. And they still deserve to know how to take care of their blood sugars. Like, one bad moment on Facebook you shouldn't get exiled for that. You know, so yeah. Anyway.
Other than all the people posting G7 supplies for sale from Kenya accounts.
Scammy people are done. I'm not okay with that. Anyway, Jon, you're really terrific. I appreciate you doing this very much. And
yeah, I had a lot of fun doing it.
Good. I'm glad. Hey, I want to thank Jon for spending so much time talking about Omnipod 5 and looping and Afrezza and all the stuff today. Thank you, Jon. I want to thank Omnipod, makers of the Omnipod 5 and the Omnipod DASH, and remind you that you can learn more and get started today at omnipod.com/juicebox. And of course, save 10% on your first month of therapy at my link, betterhelp.com/juicebox. If you can't remember the links to type them in the browsers, you can find them in the show notes of your audio player or at juiceboxpodcast.com. We talked a lot about the Facebook group today. You can find it online. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. Fantastic group. 40,000 people in it right now. Going strong. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe or follow to the podcast in the audio app you're listening in right now. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you are, hit follow or subscribe, whichever your app offers. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, BetterHelp. You can get 10% off your first month of therapy with my link, betterhelp.com/juicebox. That's betterhelp.com/juicebox. If you've been thinking about speaking with someone, this is a great way to do it on your terms. betterhelp.com/juicebox.